Hi, and welcome to the Raw Heart and Soul podcast. Today, I have a very, very special guest, Paul Chek, with me today. I've known Paul, I've been studying Paul's work for about 15 years and gotten to know him a little bit better over the last couple of years with working a little bit more closely with him. I'm going to let Paul tell you a little bit about himself. So, Paul, if you had to give a 30-second elevator pitch about yourself, what would it be?
Wow, 30 seconds. Well, I was raised in a farming family by holistic parents that were very in touch with the earth, and that never left me. And as I went into the world of high performance athletics and then orthopedic rehabilitation, it kept pointing me back to my holistic roots over and over and over again. And I found that I could not get long-term resolution with a standard orthopedic model or standard athletic development model. I couldn't even get athletes to achieve their potential. So ultimately, my life's work and teachings just kept pushing me back deeper and deeper and deeper into what holistic health really is and what are the components that one has to be aware of and engage in their life in order to live a well-balanced life and be a whole person. So that's my 30-second pitch.
In your life, how far away have you gotten from that? Like you said, that it kept pointing you back to that. Were there points in your life that you've gotten so far away from, or what is the furthest point that you've gotten away from it?
Well, when I was an athlete, which I'm still an athlete, but when I was a competitive athlete for my whole entire youth and into my 30s, I was studying what I thought to be the cutting edge science, particularly on nutrition, but found that it was causing me all sorts of problems like bloating and gassing and just discomfort, and also feeling tired and hungry more than I thought I should be. I could eat a mountain of carbohydrate and vegetables of various types or cereals and all the things that were being touted as the way athletes should train. And I was training a lot for triathlon, so it was more of an endurance athletic type diet. But I just kept finding myself not looking or feeling like I thought I should be, even though to other people I looked great and I was strong and fit and doing very well athletically. But on the inside, I just sensed something was wrong. So eventually I, through a long series of events, got back to where I realized that the way I was raised on the farm, eating mostly meat and vegetables, and then through metabolic typing testing, which I came across probably around 1998, I realized I was a protein type, which was completely the polar opposite diet of what was being touted as optimal for endurance athletes in all the current literature and research coming out of universities. So when I switched back to eating, following my natural instincts instead of editing it with what the experts
Everyone
were
else
saying,
is telling you,
yeah, then I felt fantastic. I remember a friend of mine, Jerry Telly, who's an exercise physiologist, was visiting me, and this is a long time ago, and he had been doing some research on diet as well and looking at other approaches. And so him and I were talking about my symptoms. He said, well, why don't you try something different tonight? Try just eating a can of tuna and an avocado, so you have a lot of protein and fat before bed, and just leave all the vegetables and other stuff aside. And I slept the best I'd slept in years. When I woke up and looked in the mirror, I was lean and I had no bloating or water retention. My muscle definition was the best I'd seen in years. And I woke up feeling very clear-headed, not kind of hungover like a carbohydrate hangover. Mm-hmm. And then I just kicked myself and like, why didn't I just listen to my gut the whole time and see that the symptoms of the experts were that they weren't that expert.
Right.
And so I began applying metabolic typing clinically, and I got more results with people's soft tissue healing and trauma healing through switching them to an organic diet based on their metabolic type than I'd gotten in years of studies and practices with nutraceuticals. I had studied everything out there extensively, Jeffrey Bland's research. I was using Metagenics and other nutraceutical systems, using the health appraisal questionnaire that we use in in holistic lifestyle coaching, and following that model, which I started doing in 1988. I still actually have patient files from all the way back to as early as 1988.
Wow.
And with 3 years of that, I saw very little tangible results from it. And it was quite frustrating to me because I thought, how in the world can these guys be promoting this stuff? But as a skilled therapist, monitoring tissue changes, motor recruitment changes, postural changes, emotional changes, energetic changes, I wasn't seeing much happen. But within 3 days of people eating right for their metabolic type and switching to organic food, I would feel muscles soften, trigger points started disappearing, fascia started loosening up, lymphatic fluid was flowing better in the body. It was the most powerful single brush stroke I had ever seen at that time in my clinical practice. So that's sort of a long way of saying the furthest I've ever gotten away was falling into an academic approach to my diet. And then when I was 16, I used to work in logging camps and work for hard. A lot of people won't know what shakes are, but we used to go out into the mountains, and some friends of mine had contracts where they would fall huge cedar trees, and we would buck them up into chunks and take them to shake factories. Shakes are like shingles, except they're bigger.
Right.
And so you put them on your roof to protect your roof, right? So me and my buddies were out in the mountains a lot and a long ways from anywhere. And I don't know how I got started, but I got started with rolling cigarettes and smoking them. And I got to the point where I was addicted to them, but we would get these jobs intermittently, and I was always the strongest and the fastest. We would compete with each other for who could carry the most wood out of the jungle, so to speak.
As you do.
Yeah, but after 6 months smoking cigarettes, these two guys started out performing me, and it really pissed me off. So I just said, that's enough of that. I'm not going to be losing my competitions, whether they're lifting wood or anything, due to cigarettes. So I just sort of got rid of that. But between the diet and the cigarettes, that's really, I love my body and I like winning. So I've always been very, very attuned from, I started boxing when I was 12, and I was in martial arts early as well. I don't remember exactly when I started, but I spent several years in Taekwondo, and several years me and a bunch of my friends started our own kickboxing club. So I was in competitive boxing, Taekwondo, and kickboxing for many, many years. Plus I raced motocross at a very high level. I was a nationally ranked motocross racer. I was one of the top guys in British Columbia, and I can't remember what my ranking was in Canada. And I was sponsored by the local Honda shop, and I loved motocross with my whole heart and soul. And so between boxing and motocross, those sports are so intense and so reliant upon you, unlike most team sports where you can kind of, your partners can carry the weight for you, your team members can, but it's you and your motorcycle. And it doesn't matter how fast anyone else is going. It's really as fast as you can go. And in boxing, it's you and the other guy. And so I had every reason to pay close attention, and there's a lot of injuries in both of those sports. And I've had a lot of seriously bad motorcycle racing injuries where doctors and therapists just didn't know what to do. So I really had to bring my whole focus and awareness into my body to figure out how to get broken ribs to move, or, how to get, muscle fibers to broken noses or recover from concussions and cranial injuries and neck injuries. And, I've got a lot of broken bones from all my exploits, but I ultimately, through all these athletic experiences, developed an acute sense of awareness of my body. And I've always just listened to it. And because there's so much commonality between human beings, we all need water, food, air. We all have, basically the same body plan. I found early in my career that almost everything that I identified as a problem for me and then looked for it in other people, it was right there. So gluten intolerance, it was everywhere.
Yeah.
Dietary imbalances were everywhere. The problems of eating toxic, non-organic food were everywhere. Postural problems were everywhere. Disc problems were everywhere. Whatever I figured out for myself, I could find in people easily. And the more I worked to help other people resolve their issues, the more I also found other people had those problems. So it's kind of like I just did a athletic orthopedic rehabilitation internship within my own body.
Yeah.
And then as my career progressed, I found that you couldn't really address the issues that were stopping people from healing until you actually looked at their belief systems, because I found all beliefs are the result of behaviors, whether they're conscious or unconscious. Mm-hmm. So there were people that, even though they were eating right, doing the right stretches, doing the right exercises, or people with diseases that I've worked with of extensively, many of them, that could be following the plan, but not getting the results. And for me, initially, that was baffling because I was quite good at my work and quite thorough in my assessments. But I also knew from a lot of other experience and study that there were other factors involved. But once I really started looking at, okay, this person's doing everything I'm asking them to do, but they're not making progress, inevitably it led to issues of challenge in relationships with family, spouses, and almost all of those challenges had something to do with a religious belief that they were using as the basis of their belief and or their position in whatever argument or spat or disagreement or divorce or breakdown in relationship that they were going through.
Yep.
So I had to pretty much study every aspect of the human being, from the very, very basic physics and biomechanics of the body to the biochemistry to the psychology to the anatomy of the psyche and the function of the psyche, and then everything you can imagine, from world religion to independent religions to philosophy of religion and philosophy of science. So I've been doing this, as you know, for 36 years. So I found that the human being is so wickedly complex that anybody in this profession either has to step in with a clear conscious awareness that they're now a student for life, or they're actually going to be getting comfortable with not being effective as a therapist, because if you don't grow and you don't learn, then you actually get into the very dangerous habit of trying to make people fit into your paradigm instead of trying to figure out what's really going on.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that I've learned, particularly in the last couple of years, is that if you're not willing to address those things in yourself first as a therapist, or when they come up, and sometimes they do come up when you're coaching clients or when you've got a particular client that you need to address, if you're not willing to do that, you fall into the thought process of the client's not doing it right, or they're not saying, or they're not telling you the full truth because they're not getting results. So, or that, you have to get deep with yourself if you're going to get deep with the human body and with the human person as well.
Well, you cannot really see anything in someone else that you can't see in yourself.
Yeah.
Life is really a living mirror. And the more you penetrate the depths of yourself, paradoxically, the more you find everybody else there.
Mm.
You know, when you look into your anger, you find angry people there.
Yeah.
When you look into your sadness, you find sad people there. When you look into your addictions, you find addicted people there and stressful people there. But looking into yourself academically isn't nearly as effective as looking into yourself and doing the work to heal. A lot of people look into themselves academically.
Mm.
So they have an idea of what the shadow is, but they don't do the healing work.
Right.
You know, they're very good that they're like cut and paste machines. They can regurgitate information back and sound real good, but to someone with the level of therapeutic skill and experience I have, in seconds, I can easily point
Call
out.
them out.
Well, I just ask them questions, and if they answer them honestly, it's obvious that they haven't done the work. So I think it is very, very important for us to look into ourselves, but it's important for us to engage what we find, or it actually just keeps attracting people, places, and circumstances to us that touch the triggers. Yep. That keep re-enlivening the issues. And
because we haven't learned from it in the first place, so it keeps reappearing.
And the dangerous thing is people will start projecting onto others. So what they'll do is say, oh, you'll hear women say, oh, there's no good men in the world. Or men say, oh, God, I'm so tired of women. I can't find a good one. But they don't realize, well, yeah, this is the 10th time you've broken up with a woman, and 9 of them said the same things, like you're not listening or you're not present or whatever. So if we don't engage, then we get surrounded by ourselves, which is really quite an interesting kind of a circumstance.
It sure is. I'm going to ask you about soul purpose, and because the premise of my podcast is to understand people's perspective of soul purpose and whether they think that they're living their soul purpose and how they've come to live that. Mm-hmm. And clearly you are. How do you define the soul, and how is that different to the mind or the spirit?
Well, there's a lot of definitions of the soul, and there's a lot of variation in religions. I define the soul after years and years of studying and researching it and my own inner explorations quite simply as consciousness within. Mm-hmm. So when I use the word soul, I'm talking about that which allows you to be sentient and aware that you're listening to me right now, sentient and aware that you're having thoughts, feelings, and emotions. The soul is what allows the 4 functions of consciousness, which according to Jung are thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Mm-hmm. So the soul really, it also is heavily linked to memory, because you can't be conscious without memory. Mm-hmm. That's why people say about Alzheimer's, the great thing about Alzheimer's is you get to meet new people every day. Yeah. Because you're not conscious that you've been married to that person for 35 years. So to you, it's just like coming across a child coming across a cow for the first time or something. Yeah. Because without memory, there's no reflection, there's no recall. So there's no way to compare the experience that you're having in any given moment with one that you've previously had. The soul is really an organizing principle, but soul and spirit are commonly used separately. Excuse me, I get to enjoy I like to vaporize my tobacco and herbs. I'm at the point in my life where if I can't make my work fun, I'm not interested. Spirit and soul are like heads and tails of a coin, and pure potential or God is what is in the middle. Because God has to be conscious for anyone or anything to be conscious, but God is conscious of all, And I use God as capital G, capital O, capital D to distinguish that. Capital G, little o, little d is a religious God that has wants, needs, and rules.
Yep.
Those are really thought forms. Those are ideas that we conjure up and buy into and energize and worship. But really, when you understand what God really is, that actually becomes a form of idol worship.
Right.
But the point I'm driving at is that God, in the caps of the expression of it, is that for which there is no other, and it is that which is aware of all within itself, because there's nothing behind God. So God's awareness can only be internal. There's nothing behind God.
Mm.
So I describe God like a dance floor. The dance floor doesn't do anything, but it's aware of every single insect or creature that's standing on it, dancing on it, because it's feeling the vibration of the whole experience. Yet the floor is not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So paradoxically, God as consciousness isn't doing anything except dreaming. And in the dreaming into itself creates soul and spirit. So spirit is the flow of energy and information. Mm-hmm. Everything in the created universe, according to quantum physics, boils down to energy and information. Stephen Hawking even said that energy and information is the only thing that can escape the forces of a black hole. So soul in alchemy is the feminine receptive principle, that which is experiencing, and spirit is the animating principle, or the principle of movement, the principle of transformation, the principle of energy, the principle of information.
Of action?
It's whatever moves something.
Yeah.
So when you have a thought in your head, like, I don't like the way I look, for example, that's energy and information that is put into a context that you interpret to mean a given thing. It's the soul that's having the experience of what it's like to think those thoughts. Mm-hmm. So it's the soul that gets a low self-esteem or gets a stomach ulcer from repeatedly chastising itself. The alchemists describe spirit and soul in kind of a unique way. They describe the wax stamps that kings and queens and royalty used to use when they were sending a letter so that they could know if it had been opened. Mm. So the alchemists say that the wax is the functional equivalent of the soul, because it receives whatever's on the stamp, and the stamp and its embossment, its symbol, is energy and information. It takes energy and information to make the stamp, and the seal or the symbol is a code of information, a symbol. Mm. So the soul does not say no to anything. You can think positive or negative thoughts. You can do nice things or evil things in the world. But the soul is what's remembering and experiencing it. And spirit is the flow of energy and information through the universe into our individual being, and every living being, trees, bees, birds, microorganisms, whatever. So the spirit and the soul are really one with the universe, just like all the cells in your brain can be looked at individually, but they're one with the brain itself. Mm. The flow of energy and information through the brain would be what's giving it something to process, but the experience of thinking and feeling and sensing would be the domain of the soul. And so everything that's happening within us that we would in-soul, such as our history, is actually also being recorded in the universe simultaneously at real time. And that's what the chakra system is. The chakra system is a bi-directional sending and receiving, basically broadcast. And there's step down transformers at each chakra. You have a mental chakra that steps down to an astral, or emotional that steps down to an etheric, which steps down into the physical body, which is just progressively lower vibrations. And every time you think any thought or move or do anything, it's being broadcast out into the universe. So we're all actually agents of experience within which the universe is experiencing what it's like to be a human being in a unique expression that each of us are. In other
Right.
words, you and I eating chocolate cake can be having what we think is the same experience. We're both eating chocolate cake, but your soul's experience and your spirit's appraisal of the experience could be radically different than mine.
So that being the case, if we're born with a soul, can we infiltrate, or can our soul, well, I know from my work with you that a soul can be fragmented and it can leave the body. Does that mean then that other souls can infiltrate our body?
Yeah, you're getting into a bit of a technical area, so I have to sort of answer it carefully. What we call our I in Hinduism is called the Atman, which is synonymous in many cultures with soul. It's that which is aware. But in the Vedic scriptures, it says clearly Atman is Brahman, which means God. Brahman is God. Right. And Brahman is Atman. So a beautiful metaphor that is used in Hindu scripture to explain this is if you take as many pots as you want, trillions of them if you wish, and put enough water in those pots that when you set them outside at night on the full moon and look into every one of those pots, you will see the moon in each of them, won't you?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So the moon is a symbol of the awareness of God consciousness. And the pot with the water in it is a symbol of your own experience of being conscious. Now, you could go shake each individual pot or stir it and change the surface, which would change the impression of the moon, which would be your own interpretation.
Right. It wouldn't change the moon.
But it would not change the moon. So there's many things about God and soul and spirit that are very confusing to people because they don't have enough depth of education or inner practice to distinguish whether the words on paper actually produce the results. Someone who reads about yoga but doesn't practice any of it won't really know if it's true, just like someone who reads about metabolic typing but doesn't do it won't know if it's true.
Right.
So I'm leading to a point. The point is this: if you freeze the water and then hit it with a sledgehammer, there will be chunks of ice that will fly out of there. And that would be the functional equivalent of soul loss. But the actual Brahman or moon hasn't changed, and the actual state of the truth of yourself has not changed. Because the fundamental nature, the basis, the point of origin for all creation is that point of stillness, which is not yet differentiated into an expression of energy or information, but is seeded. So just like a seed in a shell is not expressing roots, shoots, trunk, tree, limbs, and fruit yet.
Doesn't mean it's not going to be a tree.
It's all in there.
Right.
And so David Bohm, quantum physicist David Bohm, would speak of that as the implicate or the infolded order.
Yep.
And once the seed sprouts, that's the explicate. Okay. So now if the tree is exposed to a trauma like a forest fire that burns half the tree off, in Native American Indians terminology, we would say that tree has soul loss. Just like we would say you can't see the moon if half the ice in your pot has been shattered. You can only see a piece of the moon. So why I'm making this distinction is because people, when they use the term soul loss, they often get this idea in their head that you've actually lost a piece of your soul. You've lost access to the wholeness of your soul. For the same reason that if I poured a strawberry milkshake into your radio in your car, you might all of a sudden hear a lot of static and a lot of buzzing and get intermittent signal reception because I've created short circuits by dumping a liquid inside of an electrical circuit, but the radio wave's still there and everybody else can hear it perfectly clearly.
Yep.
So functionally, you've got soul loss in your radio. So soul loss actually happens at many levels. It can happen physically to trauma. And so an example of that would be if somebody, one of my clients, for example, was a very obese man. And through working with me and another CHEK practitioner, he lost, I don't know, he went from 300 pounds to 165 pounds, but he had all of this skin sagging on his stomach, kind of like some dogs with a lot of skin, almost like a pug or some of these other dogs. And it really irritated him, right? He just didn't like it because he couldn't see his beautiful abdominals, and he'd done all this work, but he just could not get rid of this. So he had quite a negative emotional orientation towards that region. And as a coping mechanism, when a person's in that state, they start to withdraw their consciousness from that part of their body, because every time they connect to it, it gives them bad feelings, or they have negative judgments of themselves, and it makes them insecure when other people see them. So what happens is sort of a protective device. The psyche withdraws itself from an area like that. And the result of that is what is classically called soul loss. So as I worked with this person, he had a lot of digestive disorders. And what I found is that he was having less of a problem digesting food, but more of a problem digesting his own beliefs and judgments of himself and his aesthetic appraisals of himself. And because each of our organs has a psychic function, the stomach not only digests food, but it's actually got a subtle energy stomach, which digests emotions, and another one that digests thoughts.
Yep.
So if a person has a physical trauma that causes them to be in so much pain, or to have a psychological reason to reject that part of their body, then they will actually withdraw their consciousness from that area, which leaves them very susceptible to penetration there by any other entity, such as, a thought form entity or a disembodied soul. So for any reason, physically, emotionally, or mentally, that we reject or are traumatized, for example, a lot of people get soul loss going to so-called spiritual groups where they're using psychedelics, and they get overdosed, and so they get into such a deep state of panic and fear, and their ego is so disabled by the psychedelic medicine that they can't filter the experience.
They can't protect themselves.
So there's so much information coming in, they get completely overwhelmed, and many of them think that they've died. So when I look at a person like that clairvoyantly, it usually looks like someone took a hammer and smashed a window, and you see spider cracks all over and chunks of glass missing. And so those people have to be reintegrated and put back together, just the way you'd have to pick up the glass and try to fit it back in, or use lead like they make stained glass windows to try to put the pieces back together. And anytime that we depart from any part of ourselves, then the energy that's normally there, the life force energy that's normally there, is shut down. And the reason that's an important concept to understand, I have to be a little technical, but what we call the etheric field, which is the interface between the astral, which is interfacing with the mental, and which is interfacing with the causal or source, the etheric field is really made of the electromagnetic energy produced by all the cellular activity and biochemical activity in our body.
So the physical. So
you've got about 30 billion biochemical reactions a second in the human body, and each of those is producing energy. There's a constant alternation from positive to negative charge, higher and lower pHs. And so if the biochemistry of the body for any reason begins to break down and a person starts to lose their vitality, let's say that they're drinking too much and the liver's beginning to fail, then their etheric field around the liver gets weak, so they cannot effectively connect their thoughts, feelings, and emotions into the liver system because the interface with the liver is too disabled. And when you produce electromagnetic frequencies, you get standing waves, and standing waves actually turn out to be waves that can carry other waves. So just like a surfer can be surfing a big wave, but wobble his board and create waves on the surface of the wave, our etheric field is the interface with the emotional vibrations or astral, which are far faster. And those ones also couple with the mental, which is even faster than the speed of light. So when we start breaking down in our biological self and our biochemistry, and we cannot produce the energy to interface with our energy field or the layers of our energy field, to a clairvoyant, it looks like there's a hole in you.
Yeah.
So if you think of yourself looking energetically like a vibrant light donut or apple, and your body's in the core, if that person's liver's going through the kind of situation I just described, when I look at that person, I often see a black spot there, or I see fragments of things like images of a trauma or images of that person being shamed by their father or their church, or things that produce anger that gets trapped in the liver that leads to some kind of sense of separation from self, or a separation from self just due to the ignorance of not realizing that what you're eating, drinking, doing, or the environment you're working is poisoning your body. So there's an example of soul loss, but that one would have to be fixed as much through nutritional therapies, detoxification, and standard holistic type approaches to healing the physical system of the liver. And then whatever other components were involved, such as maybe the drinking is coming from the guilt and shame that was imposed upon the child, then you also have to simultaneously work with the beliefs and the behaviors and the self-judgments, or the impetus to keep drinking the alcohol will not go away. So you can get people fit and healthy, but they will still be degenerating the liver as fast as you can regenerate it, because you haven't actually looked at the etiology of what drove them to drink in the first place.
Right. So when someone withdraws that consciousness away from that area, from that trauma, and this is me jumping ahead as a CHEK practitioner, does the body then give you signs that you need to go back to that area? Like, so for example, would you develop it, or could you develop a cancer or a trauma in that area that then goes, that's the body's last resort, or the mind's last resort, or the soul's last resort, of saying, you've got one more chance to heal this area. I'm giving you a really big sign here. You've got cancer in that liver. Address the problem now, not just on the physical level, but on that metaphysical level.
Yes, and so that's the reason two things happen. Those two things are death, and spontaneous healing.
Right.
Because you can give people all the right herbs and medicines and detoxification and whatever therapy, radiation, chemo, you can throw the whole hospital at them and the whole holistic kitchen sink at them. And if they're not really dealing with the issue, you see, because the thoughts and the emotions are a powerful organizing force. Your cells believe your thoughts and emotions as equivalent to God. You don't see sad people walking around with upright posture smiling.
No.
And you don't see happy people walking around in a slouch looking like someone just kicked their dog. Right? So the body is 100% honest. The body does not have a mechanism for lying or cloaking its truth. So because there's often a very complicated complex of inputs to any given disease process or illness process, such as diet and lifestyle issues, such as belief systems, such as trauma, such as self-image issues, etc. When someone comes in a situation like that, like an end-stage cancer, you are unlikely to be able to get that disease to heal unless you address it at its root cause, because the organizing force that is leading the cells to dysfunction and produce the cancer is not a physical cause, right? Thoughts are not physical things, but look how damaging they are. Emotions are not physical things, and they can either make you or break you.
Right.
So you can do all the biochemistry, and I'm using spiritual language when I say this, the soul will not let you heal until you authentically heal. And if that means to die, then you will have a newfound awareness of the purpose of the illness in the afterlife when you go through the afterlife process. That's one of the main problems that we have in the world today, is that the holistic spiritual people don't really understand the importance of a technical approach to assessment of the body and diet and lifestyle factors. They might have some various ideas, and usually they're kind of like things like you need to be a vegetarian or a vegan. They're sort of isms. They're not really, they're just other belief systems. So if you have great spiritual capacity, but you have a sick liver, you can think the right thoughts and you can do the healing at that level, but you may not get rid of your cancer because your internal biochemistry is so out of balance that someone also has to deal with that end. You can be a great doctor, biochemist, and wizard with nutrition, but be baffled as to why the person's not responding, because you can then look at their blood and say, well, they have normal levels of vitamin C, they have normal enzyme markers, they have a normal blood panel. So why are they not healing? Because you're dealing with the psyche at that point, not the biochemistry and the liver we're talking about here.
Is that why your program, like going through the CHEK, all of the learnings of the CHEK programs are as comprehensive as they are, because you can't address one thing without the other? Because
yes, yeah. Really, the CHEK Institute's education system is a result of my thousands and thousands of patients, and I specialize in challenge patients in medical failures. So people came to me when nobody knew what to do with them, and they'd seen all sorts of doctors or chiropractors or osteopaths or a lot of different people. So for example, if I've seen a person with an injury and they've already seen 10 chiropractors, highly unlikely it's a chiropractic issue. It's possible, just unlikely.
Unlikely that they've got 10 dud chiropractors treating them, or had 10 chiropractors.
Yeah. So what I would do is look at their profile, and then I would do what's called differential diagnosis. So I in my library, I have books on differential diagnosis. So I might go into a differential diagnosis book and look and say, okay, what other things cause neck pain? Well, it turns out that your heart can refer pain up into the neck and shoulder region. Your liver can do it. Your stomach can do it. Your gallbladder can do it. Your thyroid and parathyroid can do it. Your eyes can do it. Your brain tissue can do it. Many of the tissues in the mouth, jaw structure, and neck can also cause that neck pain. But the differential diagnosis is what other than the neck can do it. It turns out that you can have a real challenging relationship with someone who is a pain in the neck, literally.
Yep.
Right? And like if you have an over-controlling mother or father in your life and you see the phone ring and you're like, oh my God, what a pain in the neck or a pain in the ass or what have you. And so that's where the whole field of psychoneuroimmunology really validated this psychophysical relationship. So through my many, many years, of exploring differential diagnosis and saying, okay, let's check to see how this person's liver enzymes are. Let's see how their stomach's working. Inevitably, I found all sorts of things that were linked to their neck pain. And so I started keeping a record of those and seeing patterns emerge. And then I, studied books on, like Taoist books or Chinese medicine books on reading the body, and books by healers on reading the body. And so I started making all these correlations, and I started mapping all these things out, because there's common themes, like the chakra system is a common theme amongst human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 3 chakra systems, such as the Taoist system or Chinese medicine. There's 7 chakra systems, the Hindu system. There's 9 chakra systems, such as one of the Egyptian systems. There's 21 chakra systems, such as Cynthia Dale. But really what it boils down to is, how does the therapist or the doctor take the totality of the vibrational spectrum and break it down? Just like in mathematics, there's systems of 10 counting, but there's also systems like 12s and 6s and 3s throughout history. We just happen to use a 10 system of 0 and 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But the point that I'm making is a Taoist can find the problems through a 3 chakra system. They just have to look into more issues within the realm of each chakra. So when I look at the 7 chakra system, which I've studied a lot of them, it's the simplest and most congruent with the issues that most people are dealing with. And it has enough variation in psychological theme and physiological orientation, and it ties perfectly into the anatomy of the body.
Right.
So I stuck to the 7 chakra system because clinically, I found that it was easier to use than the Taoist system, because with 7 different dimensions, you can access more accurately. But you can use almost any of them to get the information you need. And really, what I tell my students is, remember the rule, ask, don't tell. Because a lot of young people that get a little too full of themselves say, oh, I see you're having a problem with your mother or your dad, and they start diagnosing, and the ego will immediately defend against that. And even if they're right, they're already starting off on the wrong foot.
Right.
So what I say to people is, I'm curious how your relationship with your mother is, or your father is, or whatever's rising up in me. And I'm also looking at them clairvoyantly and using all the skills that I have. And so then I just begin a dialogue, and people would say things like, that's so funny that you would ask that. I've never mentioned anything about why did you ask me that? And I might say something like, well, you've got a left shoulder injury, or a left-sided injury, which relates to the feminine principle. We always start with the mother. And how are you doing at mothering yourself? And we work out from the core of the family progressively. And since the arm is on the 5th chakra, which has to do with expressing your creativity and communicating effectively, and you've got a problem on your left side, it suggests that I should ask you about how you and your mother communicate. Oh my God, we have the hardest time communicating together. How do you feel about that? What type of stress, when you think about the challenges you have communicating with your mother, what happens in your body? And they'll say things like, my shoulder starts to hurt, or my neck starts to hurt, or I can't breathe very well. So for me, the whole anatomy of the psyche, the psychophysical anatomy, is really like a bunch of signposts. And the body and pain is really like a warning light on a dashboard that says, look here.
Right.
Because the body does not want to be out of balance. The body, left to its own devices, knows exactly how to take care of itself and heal. And that's been shown thousands and thousands of times. And that's why we have to sleep at night. If we don't get at least 8 hours a night on average, where we shut our conscious mind off, we don't have enough time for our body to recover and do the repair that the damage, considering that the average person, based on research, thinks 68,000 thoughts a day, of which 90% were found by researchers to be negatively oriented.
Yep.
Imagine the stress on your body of thinking what 68 times 0.9, it's 54,000 negative thoughts a day. Well, of course your body is going to be exhausted.
Yeah.
So if a person doesn't go into a state of complete unconsciousness at night, the mind and the emotions are creating so much biochemical byproducts and waste and stress and muscle tension and emotional holding patterns that the poor cellular system doesn't have a fighting chance in hell of recovering.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons sleep turns out to be so important, because paradoxically, the more scared, wound up, nervous, or broke you are, the more you should actually sleep, so that your body can regenerate and you can have some stability to do some constructive thinking. But what do most people do? They just worry and worry and worry and drink and drug and disrupt their ability. And so they get more and more sleepless, which leads to more and more pathology, because as the immune system gets overloaded, it has to start prioritizing what it's going to attack. And so eventually what you get is an immune system that can only look at the most dangerous cells and can even lose the ability to police those. And you see the results of this very frequently when people like this go on vacation. Usually after the first day on vacation or the first 2 days, they get sick.
Right. Yep.
It's
so
the
common.
first time they've had enough energy for their immune system to actually turn on and start doing all the sweeping under the carpet that's been going on.
Yeah.
And so that's a telltale sign of a person like that.
Yeah. And so all of those toxins come out and all of that, the immune system starts fighting it. So you see evidence of that fight.
You experience it for sure.
Yeah.
And then you think you're sick. And so you go to the doctor and they give you a pill or tell you you've got this virus or that bug and you need this shot and that shot. But
when all you need is
reality, really what you need to do is just let your body do what it needs to do, or you start getting a fever and they try to stop that. It's like, well, that's how it's killing the damn thing off. So it's sort of unfortunate that we are in a world where our medical system has become so dangerously intelligent that it's become relatively stupid, because it's really lost hold of common sense and become such an intensely for-profit industry that we really don't have a medicine system anymore. We have a disease maintenance system that's designed to sell drugs and surgery and memberships to the to the worst hotel in town.
And also erode the trust that we have in ourselves.
Yes, it does. And, and I don't want to sound anti-medical. I'm just anti-dysfunctional medical. I've met and worked with a long string of excellent doctors and nurses and therapists, but for every one of those excellent ones, there's 10 or 20,000 ones that are just robots doing what they're told to do without ever thinking about it. And almost all of them are sick from living that way themselves.
Yeah.
So
do you think everybody comes into this realm with a purpose? So a soul purpose?
Yes.
Yep. Tell me what your soul purpose is.
Well, I think I should expand on that first. My sole purpose is quite obvious. I'm here to teach people common sense. That's why I chose to be on a farm as a child, so I could get re-indoctrinated into common sense.
And you said that your soul chose that. Your soul chose to come through that family for that reason.
Yes, and because I would need to go through a lot of trauma to gain the experience and get the wounds that I would have to ultimately disentangle. So I had an intimate depth of knowledge as to what really happens to people in those kinds of environments. So there was a lot of trauma in my upbringing, but there's something I want to share, because this is another area, and I did address this in my podcast recently with Aubrey Marcus, which is out right now. It's all about death. It
was a beautiful podcast. I listened to that, and I was going to ask you something from that, and I think you're going to cover it now.
Okay, so you see, when you leave your body, not only in the afterlife, but even when you sleep at night, you're going out into higher dimensions and meeting with souls, usually that are in your soul group, that are guiding you and saying, this is how you can do better in your relationship, or you should get the hell out of that relationship. Your soul contract is over. So ultimately, you see, each soul is not an entity in and of itself. Just like if I said to you, Tanya, you have an ego. Your ego was built out of your mother's ideas, your father's ideas, your family's ideas, your schooling, your society, your culture, your religious programming, and the world. So if I said to you, Tanya, if I was to download your mind into a computer and take every idea that was in your head that you thought was your own thoughts and your own way of, like when you do 2 + 2 is 4, we naturally think we're doing that, but someone taught us that.
Right.
So if I was to filter every single idea in your field of memory to identify which of them were uniquely of Tanya's own creation, what percentage of your ego do you think would actually be Tanya?
Very little.
It would probably be somewhere, if you were highly creative, it might be 2%.
So where's the other 98% come from then? Everywhere.
From everybody in your environment.
Yeah.
And so the point that I'm making is the soul is the consciousness of the divine itself, which is interfused at every level with a degree of saturation that is absolute. In other words, your body is made of 100 trillion atoms, and those 100 trillion atoms are each 99.99999 to the 6th decimal point empty.
Yeah.
Okay. And every one of those atoms can be located on the periodic table, but paradoxically, when we say, where did those atoms come from, those elements come from? Well, some of them came from the sun, some of them came from the earth. And then we say, well, where did those elements come from that aren't in the sun? Well, they came from other stars. And we say, well, where'd the elements in that star came from? It came from every other star. They say they come from all over the universe. So what research shows is if you try to track even the physical elements of your body, it came from everywhere in the universe. It cannot be located to our sun or our earth or even our planetary chain. So God, being the moon, shining into all the buckets, each of those buckets represents a soul. But it's God that's enlightening the soul with conscious awareness. That's the reflection on the thing.
Yep.
But that soul in its transmigration, which depending on what road you want to take, Yogananda says it takes about 6 billion reincarnations through the mineral, plant, and animal kingdom to get your first human body. He says, if you knew how many souls were waiting for a human body, you would be shocked and amazed that you have one. You'd be dancing in the streets celebrating.
And probably living a lot differently to what most people do.
Yeah, in Hinduism, they say there's about 60 billion souls waiting for a body at any given time.
Wow.
So the point that I'm driving at is the same way your ego was developed. The soul is actually a product of the dream and the desires of the collective, because ultimately all of this is God wanting to experience itself, or God can't know what it is.
Yeah.
And just like you have microvilli in your small intestine and villi in your lungs, those are like little beings, each doing a job to keep you alive. And we're like little organs of perception in the body and the mind of God. And so when God dreams of, let's say, being Albert Einstein, God has to dream something into existence that can be brought into a field of scientific exploration, which requires mathematics and all the related scientists. So God has to dream that into existence through the mind of a mathematics professor a philosophy professor, a patent clerk. And so what you actually see is that every part of the whole is made of every other part of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you say, okay, then who taught Einstein's math professor math? Some other professor.
Mm-hmm.
And that person learned it from their parents and another professor.
So there's elements of all of us in everyone.
In everybody. So what happens is when you start going, well, then who taught that? Who taught that? Where'd you get that? Well, pretty soon you've encircled the entire globe.
Right. And if you're trying to differentiate that and think and separate yourself from that, that's not the soul talking, that's the ego talking.
Yeah, you know, the soul is a unique expression only in that it's a pot.
Right.
So the soul has a body, and the soul, when we die, we don't have a physical body, but people forget that what's guiding and directing our body is a series of light bodies. The causal body is the highest vibration, then the mental body, which is higher mental, and then lower mental, which is more the home of the ego, then the astral, which gives us our sense of feeling, sensation, dreaming, inner visioning.
Mm.
It's the astral that lets us have images to go with our thoughts. And then you have the physical body. So when you lose your physical body, you still have a sense of awareness of yourself. But because you're not bound by a physical body, when you look at your hand, you'll still see a hand, but it'll look like light.
Right.
Right? It'll look like something like someone lit you up with a lightsaber.
Yeah.
You know, like a Star Wars, or if you ever take a flashlight and stick it over your hand, it'll glow in the dark.
Yeah.
So just get rid of the hand, and now you've got this sense of body, which feels very much the same. And I know that because I'm a remote viewer and I do a lot of work in the astral realm, and I can be on the other side of the, you know, planet or solar system or universe, having an experience talking to people like I'm talking to you right now.
Yeah.
But because there's no physical body to correlate it to, your hand still feels like a hand.
Yes.
In other words, because your consciousness is now at the vibration of light, it doesn't seem any different to you. It's like you've just shed a skin, but here you are. And so without a long to do, that process keeps going on until ultimately the soul reaches the level of awareness and the clarity as to how it wants to express itself again in the three-dimensional realm of matter. And then, long story about that, but takes on another body.
Right.
So hopefully that puts some context to the question.
It does. So if we all come here with a purpose, what happens when I asked you the question early in the piece and said, how was there a time when you were furthest away from what you knew to be true? And you talked about motocross. So if someone's not living within that purpose, how do you see that, and how do they connect back to that?
Okay, hold that, because I just realized I forgot to tell you what I was trying to tell you. Sometimes I have to set a structure up so that a person can understand it, because if I just flat out answer the question, people will hear the words, but they won't really understand what I mean.
Go straight in and out. Yep.
So each soul is to fulfill a need of the collective.
Right.
Okay. So if we need a rebel, because God's drama is very real, right? God loves the drama. If we need a rebel, then we will collectively dream up a Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah.
As an example, or our Martin Luther King. So you could say the colored people got together and said, we need help. And collectively they dreamed Martin Luther King, and the Indian people dreamed Gandhi into existence to get their liberation. They both needed liberation. Because the true nature of God is unconditional love, or absolute freedom. But because you cannot know what unconditional love is or absolute freedom is until you've experienced limitation, the only way God can actually come to know itself is to create the illusion of limitation.
Right, because there's nothing to compare to if you don't have that.
Right. So there's no cognitive framework to know what the experience is.
You don't know where the boundaries are.
So illusion, limitation turns out to be that which actually creates freedom as something tangible. So the soul's purpose is to fulfill something in the dream of a collective. And that collective could be mom and dad. That collective could be, I don't think it's just mom and dad. I think it's usually much, much bigger than we can really realize. But you could say that the collective could be from any small group, such as mother and father, to a whole nation or a whole world. Because mom and dad are part of a family, which is part of a society or a culture, which is part of a world. And who mom and dad are is everybody that made them. So mom and dad's dream is really other people's dreams being projected through them. So their dream is really everybody's dream being projected through them. So it's like in Hinduism when they speak of Indra's net. Are you familiar with Indra's net?
No.
Basically, when Hindu mystics describe the structure of space, they say that when they look into the structure of the matrix of space, they see what look like multifaceted diamonds that are absolutely perfect mirrors. And they reflect in every direction. And every single one of these so-called diamonds in what's called Indra's net is perfectly reflecting every other diamond in the entire creation of the universe, because they're all bouncing off of each other. So it's like being in a hall of mirrors where everything's all the same images are just bouncing around. So our individual soul purpose is both something that was needed to move the experience of life, humanity, and consciousness towards a progressively greater wholeness. Because ultimately, the soul is unconditional love, because that's what gives birth to a soul, is unconditional love. So the soul comes seeded. God plays a very careful game with itself. Think of the world as a giant video game or movie set. And this is metaphor, but it points to something real. God has to invest itself into the movie set or into the video game to enliven it and make it real. So God basically says, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to play Paul Chek, or I'm going to play Tanya Carroll, or I'm going to play Donald Trump. Or, and I'm going to play it until I win the game. And only then, when I win the game, can I stop playing the game. And the way you win the game is you realize who and what you really are. So the point is that inside of each of us is the initial spark of consciousness called unconditional love. And no amount of money, fame, matter, sex, substance, objects will ever satiate that, because those all represent conditions. Right?
Right.
And if you have enough money, you might start feeling guilty because you're, watching people starve to death and not doing anything about it. So ultimately, this is why Jesus says in the Bible, a rich man can no sooner get to heaven than a camel can get through the eye of a needle. Because he's saying you can't take anything like that with you to go where you really come from, and because of what you really are. So the soul is actually seated with the conscious awareness of what it really is. And ultimately, no matter what our experiences in life, even when we die, if we have not found our way back to the authentic conscious awareness and experience of the unconditional love of God, the soul keeps reincarnating, because it's the only way it knows how to get back. Because until you've experienced enough limitation to truly understand the freedom that you are emergent from, you will never really know where else to go.
Yeah.
because your only experience is that of limitation and condition as a soul. Because you're born, and this is what the story of Adam and Eve is all about. Adam and Eve didn't even know they were naked until they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And all of a sudden they realized they were naked.
Yeah.
Okay. So the soul is like Adam and Eve in this pristine state of oneness with God, but it doesn't even know it's naked. But once it eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, now it can compare things. Now it has the susceptibility to program biases. Now it can name things. That's a tree, that's a dog, that's a river, that's a mountain,
Condition.
that's a star. But it doesn't really have any way to know itself other than these ideas that create further limitation. But we reach a point in our own spiritual evolution where we realize no amount of naming and no amount of limitation is fulfilling us. I mean, how many rock stars and movie stars and famous musicians and athletes have drugged themselves to death, sexed themselves to death, and made more money than they could ever spend, but they end up committing suicide because they just cannot get satiated. There's something missing they cannot find in matter. So matter is kind of like a Mexican finger trap. Our soul wraps itself up in it, but the soul reaches a point where its only urge is to be free of it all. And that urge is the beginning of the spiritual quest. That's when we become spiritual people. The religious impetus is really more designed to trigger the polarities that are necessary to make a mind function. That's why Jung says all religious systems are designed specifically to protect you from the direct experience of God.
Yeah.
Because if you had a direct experience of God, it would annihilate the ego like a bug flying into a bonfire. It would just be gone, because nothing can enter into God that isn't at the frequency of unconditional love, or God itself would cease to exist because there would be a condition there. So there would be nothing to carry consciousness. So do you see what I'm really pointing out is that the soul is actually unconditional love that is jumping into an experience of itself through limitation, but because its only way to have a sense of self is through limitation, that it goes lifetime after lifetime after lifetime until it actually comes to realize that what it is not its body, its money, or even its friends. It is the consciousness that is witnessing and experiencing the illusion. And then the quest to study, well, how do I free myself from this illusion? And that's where you see the mystics. The mystics are the true spiritual pioneers of each religion. So the yogis meditating for years in caves, or Eckhart, or Saint Francis of Assisi, or Saint Hildegard of Bingen, or Rumi, the Sufi master Rumi, or Sri Nisargadatta, or there's lots and lots of them, right? But these are the people that became spiritual athletes and realized that they were ready to get out of here, because the truth of them cannot be found in limitation. The truth of them can only be found in freedom. And the ultimate form of freedom is unconditional love. The problem is we have so much empathy for the rest of God. Once we reach a certain level of spiritual development, we are kind of at this place where you see the two schools of Buddhism. You have the Mahayana school, and I think it's the Vajrayana school. The Mahayana school means you will keep coming back until all souls are enlightened.
That's a long time.
Because you have empathy and compassion for the fact that that's God.
Yes.
These are all pieces of God caught in this little video game called life. But the other school of Buddhism says, once you realize it's all an illusion and you reach nirvana, let go of the ego, let go of self-identity, and just return back to oneness, because this is all Maya. It's all an illusion. The difference is the people in the Mahayana school know that it's the illusion. It's not just an illusion, it's the only illusion.
Yeah. There's nothing
Right?
else.
There's
Yep.
no other way to experience love.
Yes.
Right? We have to have each other to experience love.
Yeah.
There has to be a duality. But to go back to God, to enter into nirvana, is to go into a non-dual experience, which requires the complete and utter extinction of the ego or sense of separation. So that's a very hard thing for a human being to do, because everything that gives us meaning has something to do with experiences with other people and other places and other things.
Yeah.
So to enter into nirvana and stay there has two problems. You have to be ready to lose everything. And the riddle is, what will you become next? Because you have no control. You might be a cockroach next. You could be an asteroid, because you have no conscious control over your direction. So you have to be so ready to fully trust God that you're willing to completely let go of everything that may have been billions of reincarnations.
Yeah, that's a lot to give up.
It is, but at the same time, it's the reason that the whole universe is doing what it's doing, and it's the reason God creates this stuff, because without that journey, God has no awareness of what it is. So really, all of us and all of it is God embodying itself in an illusion to create the perception of a virtual reality based on separation, so that the experience of love can be engaged. And as we grow and mature, the quality of love we share with ourselves and others goes from sex and violence love to conditional love to empathetic and compassionate love. And finally, through however many lifetimes of being an empathetic and compassionate lover, such as a spiritual teacher, or a Buddha, or a master, or just a empathetic and compassionate, truly empathetic and compassionate person who could be a farmer, then we come to the realization that the only way we can really fulfill the whole purpose that we began the journey as a soul for is to return back to the ocean and trust God enough to say, hallelujah, we made it home. Let's let go of it all now.
Let's be one. How do you then, where's my question? How do you separate God from religion? Big question.
Well, it's sort of that's like saying, how do you separate water from wetness? Because there's nothing that isn't God. Religion is a set of beliefs that are based on other people's ideas. This is why Rumi said, no man can get to God until he becomes a heretic. Religions are systems of beliefs based on somebody else's experience. You're not Jesus.
No.
I'm not Jesus. I'm not Buddha. You're not Buddha. I'm not Muhammad. You're not Muhammad. I'm not Lao Tzu. You're not Lao Tzu. So all I'm saying is what we call religion is actually the canonization of other people's experiences. And some of them get power drives and say, okay, here's the rules you got to follow, or we'll kill you, or you'll burn in hell, or whatever.
Yep.
Which means that they're just spiritually unevolved. Just because they're a religion and they're a priest, we have the illusion that they're evolved. But a lot of doctors are lousy doctors, and a lot of professional drivers are lousy drivers. So the function, as I mentioned, of religion is because it creates the dialectic necessary, a field of tensions necessary for the thought process to engage. You have to have an is and an isn't.
Yeah.
Or you can't distinguish anything. You can't have thought without this polarity. So religion is actually one of the most important functions of mind, because it sets up a field of resistance that we have to work through. And inevitably, as the soul grows and matures, it starts asking bigger and better questions like, could Jesus really be the only Son of God? And does that make any sense? And if you really have to accept Jesus as your Savior to go to heaven, what does that say about the man, woman, or child who lives in some part of the world where they've never even heard of Jesus, but they have been just as or even more loving and more respectful to life and people than the person who goes to a Christian church as an axe murderer and asks for repentance and all of a sudden is allowed into heaven? So you see, as the soul matures, it starts reflecting on its own internal mental contents and sifting through it and asking if it's really true, because anything that isn't true ultimately creates separation from the truth of ourselves, which is unconditional love.
Yeah.
So as we embody these ideas, such as harsh Catholic ideas, for example, we actually have a paradox that emerges. We think we're worshiping God, but we feel terrible inside because living that way and worshiping that way is exclusional. It pushes other people away from us.
Yep.
And so when we realize, wait a minute, the only people that I can really feel safe with is people from my own religion, but that only makes up a small percentage of the world population.
That doesn't seem right.
How do I get to love the rest of God? And if God only made these people as the chosen ones, then God must be a very malicious God who wants to exterminate people and start all these wars, which makes for a very unintelligent God, which doesn't match up with the grandeur of the universe.
No.
So what happens is religion is really like the north and south poles of a magnet that sit inside of the electric engine. If you don't have a north and south pole, you cannot get any rotational energy. So the dialectic is set up between Christianity and Islam. You can call one south and one north. They both believe in God, but they're diametrically opposed about how you go about doing it, for example. So there you see, when a Muslim and a Christian gets together, there's this powerful field of tensions that leads them to acting in ways that is not loving at all, which leaves them feeling even more separate from the truth of themselves. And because in the heart of us is our soul, deep down inside, we know that exactly what Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Lao Tzu said, the golden rule, do unto others as Lao Tzu is the originator of that, actually. I mean, not Lao Tzu, Confucius. So what happens is that the higher self of us, the truth of us that knows God, which is really the higher self of the part of us that it takes a while for us we have to get to the point where our ego is creating so much pain for us that we have to reach deeper into ourself, which almost always requires that you have to seriously question your religious programming. And it almost always requires that you have to start looking into other religions to find other ways of relating to God that carry the viewpoints that can free you from the limitations of whatever belief system you're in. And so in some schools of thought, for which there's many, and I believe this, they say we reincarnate through each of the 12 signs of the zodiac and live enough lifetimes in that sign of the zodiac to actually perceive the experience of God in life as a Virgo or a Cancer or a Scorpio or an Aries or a Leo or a Libra. And we also reincarnate through each of the world's major religions until we've had enough experience to really experience that view of God. In tarot, that cycle is the 21 archetypes of the tarot plus the Fool. The Fool is the new soul, but the wise fool is the soul who's reincarnated so many times that they've actually lived through the archetypes of the zodiac and the world major religions and belief systems, so that now their thinking process is so evolved and so comprehensive and complete that they actually don't fit into society or culture anymore. And so this is how you get a shaman or a mystic or someone that has such a sort of a Renaissance man type depth and breadth of knowledge that it's hard to figure out how does one human being carry that much wisdom in them. But what you don't realize is that's a soul who's gone through so many incarnations, through so many different viewpoints and so many different cultural experiences, that it now is here as a guiding force, like a shepherd guiding the sheep, to say, I can answer your questions for you. Let me tell you the limitations of that religion. This is how to practice it in a way that's more freeing for you. And so those are the souls that often don't have to come back anymore, but they come back because they realize that this is sort of a nursery for God to realize itself.
Learning. Yep.
Yeah.
I am going to ask you one more question, I think. I've covered pretty much everything. What excites you now? What are you studying right now? And what are your plans for the future?
Well, what excites me now is my podcast and my kids and Angie and Penny and our beautiful home. But I really, aside from just the joy of my kids and the love and companionship from Angie and Penny, and Paul Jr.'s girlfriend is going to have a baby in January. So
you're going to be a grandfather.
Yeah, I'm going to be a grandfather.
Wow.
Took him a while. He's 41. He'll be 42 this coming summer. He's 41. And Mana is 4.5. So I've got a bit of a gap, as you know.
Yeah.
But I really just love my kids. They're so beautiful, you know, and I just marvel at them and just their intelligence and their beauty. And I love what we've created together, and I love the mission and the vision and the values of the Institute. And I love art and exercise and building things and teaching the things that I think are the most important, you know, which is the various things that I teach. But I really feel great fulfillment with my podcast because I'm able to reach, you know, a lot of people with a medium that's quite enjoyable to work in. I used to have to write articles and books to say the same things, but it's a lot of work.
It's less time consuming to talk about it.
Yeah, and it's more fun, and I get to learn from a lot of really cool people and share with lots of people. And so I'm excited that, you know, I'm 59 now, and I'm finally at a point in my life where I've done the hard work of building the Institute and all the intensive research. So I still study a lot and practice every day, and I just go deeper and deeper into my spiritual practices. And I love shamanism. You know, I love exploration with plant medicines. And really, you know, my hobby is looking into the mind of God and to see why and what it's all here for, and, you know, looking into myself and helping others do the same. What am I studying? I'm studying an excellent book that is an investigation into the validity of the soul based on scientific and empirical evidence. That is really a book that is saying all the evidence suggests that we do live after death, that only our body dies. And I've studied this for years and years and years, but this happens to be a very good book. I'm also studying a great book in Jungian psychology. I'm studying another book that's really like an overview of the current advances in quantum physics and cosmology, looking at why everything's here, how it works. Those are the main things. And then I'm working on, you know, I paint as often as I can. So I'm doing a painting for my grandson. I go into meditation and connect to the soul of people that I do paintings for. And so I recently got the image for my grandson. And so I'm looking forward to the holidays where I have a little more time to sit and paint, because it's hard for me to paint in short bursts. I have to like have a day to open myself up to the process. But I think that's kind of it. I think what's going on in the world is very interesting. Everything from the whole COVID pandemic to Donald Trump to, robots and AI technology. There's a lot of really
interesting things.
Dangerously interesting things going on. It's just like, I really am watching it and studying it because I have to know what to prepare my children for and how to prepare them, because the world's going to change faster in the next 20 years than it did probably in 2 or 3 people's lifetimes our age. And so for me, it's really a study of a great mystery. It's like, I always say the answer to everything is yes from God. So if you want to be half robot, half man, the answer is yes. If you want to play with AI and see if you can upload yourself to a cloud, the answer is yes. If you want to go to war, the answer is yes. So because God really has no attachment, just the pure interest in exploring itself, and God has no fear of death because God can't die.
Right.
So I find the world is kind of like 2 million IMAX theaters all coupled to each other. And you just go from movie to movie, and sometimes those movies conflict with each other.
Definitely. When will you know that your work here is done? Because I know that before you had the children, before you had Mana and your daughter, you had said that you got into a point with the CHEK Institute where you felt you were really tired from travel, and you thought almost that your time was done. And Mana coming in and the way he came in changed that.
Yes.
Do you know, like, how will you know when your work is done?
Well, for a long time, I actually thought I was going to die around this time. I really had a strong sense I was going to leave around 58 years of age. I'm 59 now. But when Mana and Zoe came particularly, I just have so much love for them and concern for their well-being that I found new joy and new reason. The earth had gotten very boring for me. Let's just say I'd been here a lot of times, and I'm a fool. In tarot, I'm actually a fool.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, my when you do the calculation on my birth date to do the soul path and personality path, I'm a 22, which is a master number. 2 and 2 is 4, and there's only 22 archetypes, and the 22nd archetype is 0, the Fool. So I'm an emperor personality, an emperor soul path, and a personality path is 0, the Fool. But I got to the point where it's just like, oh my God, it's just the same saga everywhere, same questions, same silliness. And I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go. But then when Mana came, I was like, it just blew my heart chakra open. And Zoe, having my first daughter, just nailed me. She's got me wrapped around her finger, something fierce. So I think now my biggest interest is staying as long as I can to really ground them in the world and give them the skills they need, and to protect them from people like Bill Gates and others that have very ill intent for our children, and to educate them how to take care of themselves, feed themselves. As soon as Mana's old enough, I want to take him into a wilderness survival training, so for a good spell out there. So it's not just like camping.
I was going to say, not like the Scouts.
No. He's going to experience real hunger and real discomfort, so he learns how to take care of himself. Because unfortunately, I can't with any assurance anymore determine what we're going to create together and for each other, for better or worse. My dream is that humanity wakes up and steps into its adulthood and starts regaining the sovereignty of its own body and its own mind, and not getting sucked in by all the technocrats and the brain programming and money machine. Otherwise, we're going to just bleed this earth of its resources so fast. We're walking on very thin ice right now.
I was just going to say, I'm one of the most optimistic people that you'll find, and I've got hope, but I don't know that that's going to happen in our lifetime.
I tell people I'm an optimist, but I'm equally a realist.
Yeah.
And the problem is I have too much knowledge of human behavior and the environmental sciences. So when I look at what's the rate of change in a culture or a world populace relative to the rate of consumption of natural resources,
and we've outpaced it. Yeah, like
you don't have to be too mathematically inclined to go, we're in deep shit.
Yeah.
And I saw a great demonstration by David Suzuki probably 10 years ago, the famous Canadian, I don't know, I think he's a biologist.
Yeah.
But he's a real down-to-earth, super smart guy, right?
Yep.
And so what he did is he did a calculation of the rate we're consuming the resources on the planet relative to what's available. And he then modeled it with bacteria, and the bacteria were the representation of the human population. And he did this mathematically, so it was very accurate. Then he put the amount of resources that he calculated that the earth had left and let the bacteria consume it at the rate of consumption relative to the earth's capacity for regeneration.
Yep.
And his conclusion was that we are at the 11th hour, 59th minute, and 59 seconds of human existence unless we immediately change the way we do things with nature radically. Well, how many people do you know in your entire life that change immediately or radically toward not using iPhones, not wasting resources, paying attention to what they're doing, working together as a community? Well, I mean, I could go on and on and on.
Not very many. I
have a sad feeling that what's going to happen is millions and millions of people are going to go, and it's going to wake the other ones up that, okay, we have to change our behavior or we too are going to be gone. And that's why I want to make sure my kids are well ready for the show.
Totally. Thank you very much for being with me today, Paul. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. It's fun. Yeah, good questions. I always enjoy the deeper questions myself.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Lots of love.